Chapter 1. London lay beneath a smothering fog, thick as wool and as heavy as a secret unspoken. Gas lamps flickered dimly against the gloom, their feeble glow swallowed whole by the mist. The streets, wet with a night's rain, glistened under the faint light, as if the city itself had wept for reasons unknown. It was an evening fit for ghosts and whispers, for mysteries that defied the grasp of reason. I had been sitting in my usual chair at 221B Baker Street, savouring the warmth of the fire and the familiar rustle of Holmes shuffling through his case files. The air was thick with the scent of Turkish tobacco, curling from his pipe in lazy spirals. It was, by all accounts, a perfectly ordinary night. That is, until the bell rang. There was something peculiar about the sound, a mournful chime, deeper than the brass knocker of our door should have allowed, almost as if it echoed from some distant place rather than just outside. Holmes stiffened, setting down his pipe. He met my gaze briefly, his expression unreadable. "Watson," he said quietly, "I have the strangest feeling that we are about to receive a visitor of great consequence." I could not say why, but an uneasy chill ran through me as I rose to answer the door. A man stood upon the threshold, a gaunt figure wrapped in a heavy wool coat, his hat dripping with rain. He was middle-aged, with hollow cheeks and eyes that darted nervously into the fog behind him. When I ushered him inside, he hesitated for the briefest moment, as if uncertain that he should enter. Holmes studied him intently from his seat by the fire, his piercing gaze flicking over every detail, the mud on his boots, the faint ink stain upon his cuff, the subtle twitch of his fingers. The man removed his hat with trembling hands and cleared his throat. His voice, when he finally spoke, was hoarse and weighted with distress. "My name is—" He stopped. A pause. A frown. His lips parted again, but no name followed. Holmes leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "You do not know your own name," he stated, rather than asked. The man's face contorted in frustration. "No, I do. I must. It's—" He let out a shuddering breath. "It's gone." I exchanged a glance with Holmes. "Gone," I repeated. The man pressed a hand to his forehead. "Doctor, I swear to you, I knew it when I left my lodgings an hour ago. I knew it when I stepped into the hansom cab that brought me here. But now it's as though it was never mine to begin with." Holmes regarded him with an intensity I had seen only in the most perplexing of cases. "Tell me what you do remember." The man swallowed hard. "There is a house, Mr. Holmes, a house that should not exist. And yet I was there just last night." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But when I returned this morning, it was gone. Not abandoned, not destroyed, simply gone. And no one remembers it was ever there." Holmes exhaled softly, eyes glinting like steel in firelight. A most curious case indeed. Chapter 2. As the man whose name, for reasons he could not fathom, remained absent from his mind, sat before us in our modest Baker Street rooms, Holmes studied him with a quiet intensity that I had come to recognize as a prelude to something profound. "Tell me," Holmes began, his voice as sharp as ever, "about this house you claim to have visited. Describe it in detail." The man hesitated, then nodded. His voice trembled, and he clasped his hands tightly together as if to steady himself. "It was a large townhouse, Mr. Holmes, located on the corner of Radnor Street and Fleet Row. You could see the spire of St. Bartholomew's in the distance from the window of the study. It was a home of great age, with cracked stonework and ivy curling around the bricks like a thickening fog." He faltered. "But the strangest thing, no one there remembered me. Not the butler, not the cook, not even the children. They all looked at me as if I were a stranger, and yet I was sure I had been there before that very night." Holmes' gaze sharpened. "You say they looked at you as if a stranger?" The man nodded. "Yes, and when I left, I made sure to leave with a firm memory of the address and the place to ensure I would remember. But this morning, he swallowed. I returned, only to find the street empty. The house was no longer there. I could sense the man's confusion and fear, but a deeper concern stirred within me. There was something more to this than mere forgetfulness, or a momentary lapse in memory. The man seemed certain, yet his reality, like a worn rug, was being pulled from beneath him. Holmes, could this be some form of psychological delusion? I asked, unsure of where to place my growing unease. Holmes shook his head. No, Watson. Delusion is not so easily anchored in precise details. This is something far more insidious, something, I suspect, that reaches into the very fabric of time itself. At his words, a chill ran down my spine. The fog outside seemed to thicken, pressing against the windows like a weight. Holmes rose suddenly from his seat and walked to the window, his silhouette stark against the dimming light. Do you see, Watson? We are surrounded by more than just fog tonight. This is the veil of a mystery older than the city itself. I stood and joined him, peering out into the fog. But how could a house simply vanish? A building cannot be erased from existence. Not without aid, Holmes replied, his voice distant. A house can be erased if someone has the means to rewrite history itself. I frowned, unsure whether he was speaking metaphorically or, as was often the case, setting the stage for a more complicated explanation. Mr. Alexander, Holmes said, turning back to our visitor, you mentioned the butler and the children. Were any of them familiar to you from prior occasions? Alexander paused, clearly racking his brain for an answer. Yes, now that you mention it. The butler seemed like someone I had met before, years ago, in fact. He looked the same, but no one else seemed to recall him. And the children, they were strangers to me, though they have an air of recognition about them. Holmes' eyes gleamed with sharp intensity. A family, one that exists only in memory, yet a butler who remains unchanged. These contradictions are vital. Tell me, Mr. Alexander, do you still remember where you stayed last night? The man's brow furrowed. I stayed at the Bell Tower Inn, just off Fleet Row. It's not far from Street Bartholomew's. But I've been there many times before, and yet, he trailed off, his voice faint. The Bell Tower Inn, Holmes repeated, as though testing the name on his tongue. Where you stayed the night of your visit to the house. Correct, Alexander said, though his voice was far less certain. Holmes turned toward me, his expression unreadable. Watson, the time has come to investigate the location Mr. Alexander has just provided us. A vanishing house often requires a careful look at its surroundings. I felt a growing sense of unease, yet also the familiar thrill that only a case of this magnitude could bring. And if the Bell Tower Inn itself is somehow part of this strange disappearance. Holmes smiled, but it was not a reassuring expression. Then, Watson, we will be forced to confront something even more impossible than we have yet imagined. Our investigation took us through the rain-slicked streets, the mist parting in the wake of our brisk walk. The Bell Tower Inn was situated exactly where Alexander had indicated, a quaint establishment with a faded sign that swayed gently in the breeze. The inn was seemingly ordinary, yet, as I stepped inside, something about it felt wrong. The innkeeper, a stout man with a friendly face, welcomed us warmly. Good evening, gentlemen. How may I assist you tonight? Holmes wasted no time. We are investigating the recent disappearance of a nearby house, a house that, according to reports, should be standing just down Fleet Row. Could you tell us if such a structure ever existed? The innkeeper blinked, then smiled politely. A house down Fleet Row? I can't say I know of one. But Fleet Row's been quiet for years, hasn't it, Doris? He called over his shoulder to the woman cleaning dishes in the corner. I glanced over at the woman, who nodded absently. Fleet Row. No houses down there for some time. Holmes pressed on. And yet, this man here, he gestured to Alexander, claims to have stayed in such a house last night. He believes it to have vanished upon his return. What can you tell us about that? The innkeeper grew silent. Vanished, you say? He seemed to be weighing the words, his face hardening. That's peculiar. Holmes, ever perceptive, seemed to notice the change in the man's demeanour. You know something, don't you? The innkeeper's smile faltered. I'm sorry, but I can't help you with that. Holmes stepped forward, his eyes cold and steady. Do you know of any individuals who have vanished from this very town? A person erased from every memory, from every record. Do you know anything about a secret society that could bend reality itself? The innkeeper stiffened. He opened his mouth to respond, but then closed it, as if suddenly unsure of how to proceed. Chapter 3. As Holmes stood at the threshold of the Bell Tower Inn, his expression hardening, I could feel the weight of the mystery settling deeper into my chest. The innkeeper's silence spoke volumes. His furtive glance toward the woman Doris, as if seeking her support before he spoke, only fueled my suspicion. Holmes had already discerned something that I had missed, and his mind, ever calculating, was already turning the gears of deduction with precision. Watson, Holmes said suddenly, breaking the quiet, we will need to look through the town's records. This matter goes beyond the simple case of a vanishing house. He turned back toward the innkeeper, his voice sharp, demanding. Tell me, do you have a record of past guests? Names, dates, and such? The innkeeper's hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with a set of keys, trying to avoid Holmes's gaze. Of course, Mr. Holmes, but most of the guests, well, they come and go without much trouble. I can show you the register. He led us toward the back of the inn, into a dusty office that seemed untouched by time. The walls were lined with aged bookshelves, their contents a jumble of forgotten ledgers and papers. A single candle flickered faintly in the corner, casting long shadows across the room. Holmes stepped forward with his usual confidence, scanning the rows of registers stacked on the counter. The innkeeper retrieved the most recent ledger and opened it with a flourish. Here we are, he said, nervously flipping the yellowed pages. A list of recent visitors, as you requested. Holmes leaned in, his eyes narrowing. And where is the record of Mr. Alexander's stay? The innkeeper hesitated for a moment too long, his eyes flickering back and forth between Holmes and the ledger. That's odd, he muttered. He was here, I swear, but I don't see his name listed. His fingers fumbled at the pages, turning them back and forth in a panicked blur. I must have made a mistake. Let me. Holmes cut him off with a sharp gesture. No, there is no mistake. Mr. Alexander's name should be here, and yet it is not. I will ask you one more time. What are you hiding? The innkeeper gulped. He glanced toward Doris, who was still working silently in the corner, her back turned to us, oblivious, or perhaps pretending to be. The innkeeper wiped his brow, looking cornered, as if trapped by his own lies. Mr. Holmes, he began, his voice strained. There are things in this town that are better left untouched. People who are better left forgotten. His voice dropped to a near whisper, and I could barely hear the next words. It's not just the house that disappears. It's the people connected to it. Holmes straightened, his gaze locking onto the man. Explain. The innkeeper swallowed hard, glancing nervously toward Doris again. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. No one ever does. But he looked around one more time, as though he feared someone might overhear. There's an old society in this town, Mr. Holmes. A secret one. They've been around for centuries, maybe longer. They're the ones who control what people remember, who controls what's real. He paused, his eyes darting to the door as if to ensure no one else could hear. They erase people, Mr. Holmes. Erase them completely. No one remembers them, not a single soul. A chill ran through me at the mention of such an absurd claim. The very idea seemed to stretch the boundaries of reason. You mean to say, these people, this society, have the power to erase not just memories, but entire histories? The innkeeper nodded slowly. Yes, and more. They control what remains, what stays in the public consciousness. They rewrite things, edit them as if they're nothing more than ink on paper, a house, a person. They can vanish. All that remains is a void. And when they erase someone, no one remembers them, not even their closest friends or family. Holmes was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the innkeeper, his lips pursed in concentration. I could see the wheels of his mind turning, as they always did when faced with the impossible. "Tell me," Holmes said at last, "does this society have a name?" The innkeeper nodded slowly, lowering his voice further. "They call themselves the Custodians." I felt a shiver travel down my spine at the mention of the name. Custodians. The word itself sounded harmless enough, but there was something chilling in the way the innkeeper spoke it, as though he had just invoked a terrible force that should never be named. "We need to learn everything we can about them," Holmes said, turning away from the innkeeper. "We will begin our investigation at once." He glanced back at the man. "Tell no one of what you have said here, for your own safety." The innkeeper nodded hastily, looking as if a great weight had been lifted off his shoulders. "I'll keep quiet, Mr. Holmes. I don't want any trouble. Please, just be careful." We left the Bell Tower Inn and made our way down Fleet Row, our steps muffled by the thick fog. The town felt oppressive now, its streets and buildings suddenly unfamiliar, as though the very essence of the place had shifted in our perception. The weight of the innkeeper's words pressed upon me. Could there truly be a group that had the power to manipulate not just memories, but the very fabric of reality itself? Holmes, however, seemed unshaken. "We are on the verge of uncovering something far more significant than we initially believed, Watson," he said, his voice calm and assured. "The Custodians are not mere fiction, but a very real and dangerous force." We walked in silence for a time, the fog swirling around us like a thick curtain. The air was heavy with the tension of a mystery that refused to be solved through conventional means. Holmes paused suddenly and turned to me, his eyes gleaming with a newfound intensity. "Watson," he said, "it is imperative that we visit Radnor Street immediately. The key to understanding the Custodians lies within the history they have attempted to erase. We must find what has been lost." Chapter 4. The fog had grown thicker by the time we reached Radnor Street. The streets, normally bustling with the usual London activity, were eerily quiet, as though the fog itself had swallowed the life from the city. Holmes moved with purpose, his coat tails flicking behind him, his brow furrowed in concentration as he made his way through the mist. "Holmes," I ventured, unable to suppress my growing unease, "how do you propose we uncover anything on Radnor Street? The house has disappeared, and so has every trace of it." Holmes glanced at me over his shoulder, a flicker of his usual sharp wit breaking through his otherwise grim demeanor. "We are not here to find the house itself, Watson. We are here to trace its history. The Custodians, if they exist, will have left their mark somewhere in the official records. The problem is, Watson, the world does not remember it. What the Custodians seek to bury, we must bring to light." We arrived at an imposing building on Radnor Street, a structure that seemed to breathe history with every stone. The Archives, the very repository of London's forgotten and long-preserved records. Holmes wasted no time in stepping inside, where a quiet clerk, pale and thin as though he had spent too long buried in dusty files, looked up from his desk. "Mr. Holmes, I presume?" The clerk's voice was soft, and he gave us a quick glance, clearly not surprised by our appearance. He must have been briefed or perhaps expected visitors of a different nature. Holmes gave a curt nod. "We need access to the records of Radnor Street, specifically any that pertain to a house that once stood at the corner of Fleet Row and Radnor Street. It is a house that no longer exists, but we have reason to believe it was erased from history itself." The clerk blinked, clearly perplexed, but after a brief hesitation he nodded. "There is no record of such a house here, Mr. Holmes, but you are welcome to peruse the archives. We keep everything, even the forgotten details." I felt a strange chill as the clerk motioned to the rows of records, all neatly arranged in wooden cabinets that stretched high into the air. The air in the room was thick with dust, and the dim light made everything feel as though it existed in some forgotten corner of time. There was a stillness to the place, a kind of reverence for the dead facts it contained. Holmes stepped toward the cabinets with his usual assuredness, beginning his search. I followed closely, but there was something about the place, the way the records sat untouched, that made me feel as though we were intruding on something far darker than mere history, something that should not be disturbed. He pulled a file from one of the cabinets, scanning it with his eyes before moving on to the next. Each record was more cryptic than the last. There were references to street names, properties that had been redeveloped, and even mentions of families that had moved away. Yet there was no mention of the house Mr. Alexander had described. "This is impossible," I muttered under my breath. "Not a single mention of the house, Holmes. Not one." Holmes did not answer at first, his brow furrowed as he pored over another stack of documents. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he looked up, his expression tense but resolute. "I was hoping for a more direct clue, Watson, but I believe we have found something far more valuable." He pulled a single document from the pile, its edges yellowed and worn, as though it had been buried for centuries. "This," he said, holding it out to me, "is a list of residents for Radnor Street, but notice the dates. This record, dated some 10 years ago, mentions several families who apparently lived here. One name, though, has been crossed out." I leaned over his shoulder, my gaze following his finger. The name was unfamiliar, nothing more than a scrawled line half erased, a name lost to time. "That," Holmes said, his voice low, "is the name of the person whose memory has been erased. Someone tied to the house, a person whose very existence has been removed. The Custodians left their mark here, Watson. And this is a clue." "But why cross out a name?" I asked, unsure of the implications. "Why not simply omit it?" Holmes tapped the document thoughtfully. "Erasing a name is not enough. You must also make others forget it ever existed. Erasure is not just an act of omission. It is a deliberate manipulation of history, one that leaves behind traces for those who know where to look." He leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Custodians, Watson, are not content to simply remove individuals from memory. They want to erase the very possibility of their existence." I could feel a cold weight pressing down on me as Holmes continued, unrelenting in his pursuit of the truth. The implications were horrifying. A secret society capable of altering not only memories, but the very fabric of reality itself. And we had just begun to uncover their influence. Holmes stood up suddenly, folding the document with care and slipping it into his coat pocket. "We must visit the local constabulary. The authorities will have records that may shed more light on the nature of this society's work, particularly with regard to any disappearances." He turned to the clerk, who was still watching us from behind his desk with a vacant expression. "Keep this between us," Holmes warned, his voice colder now than I had ever heard it. "There are forces at work here that you do not wish to anger." The clerk nodded, his face paling further as he returned to his papers. There was no protest, no further questions, only silence. As we made our way back into the thickening fog, I found my mind racing with the possibilities. The Custodians were not just an anomaly, they were a malignant force, one that threatened the very essence of our perception of truth. and we were standing at the edge of an abyss. "Holmes," I said, trying to steady my voice, "what happens if we can't stop them? What if the truth becomes something we can never recover?" Holmes paused, his expression unreadable, and then he spoke in a voice tinged with something darker than usual. "Then, Watson, we shall have to redefine what it means to remember." Chapter 5. The constabulary stood in sharp contrast to the quiet, oppressive atmosphere of the archives. Where the latter had felt like a tomb of forgotten knowledge, the constabulary was a place of bustling order, though I couldn't shake the sense that it was also somehow inadequate, as if its structure could never fully contain the mystery unfolding before us. Holmes strode into the station with purpose, his eyes darting around the room, his mind already at work. I followed closely behind, uneasy yet eager to see what new revelations would surface. The constables at their desks barely looked up as we entered. They were used to Holmes's presence, and as usual, it seemed as though they had learned not to question his methods. "We need to speak to Inspector Hughes," Holmes said, his voice carrying the authority that always made it impossible for anyone to deny him. The officer closest to the door looked up, nodding silently. "Right away, Mr. Holmes." We were ushered into a small, dimly lit room where Inspector Hughes, a stout man with greying hair and a weary look, was already seated at his desk. The moment he saw Holmes, his face softened, though there was a hint of frustration in his eyes. "What brings you here this time, Holmes?" Inspector Hughes grunted, glancing at me before focusing back on the detective. "Another one of your puzzles." Holmes wasted no time. "We're investigating a disappearance, a vanishing that goes far beyond a simple missing person case. A man, once part of this town, has vanished entirely from memory. Not only has he disappeared from the records, but no one remembers him. Not a soul." Hughes raised an eyebrow, obviously skeptical. "Another one of those, eh? I don't know what you're trying to pull this time, Holmes, but we've had enough of these fanciful cases. People leave, disappear, sometimes they get lost in the system. It happens. But this?" He gestured vaguely to the room. "What you're describing doesn't seem likely." Holmes did not flinch, his gaze unwavering. "You're wrong, Hughes. This is no ordinary disappearance. There's something far more dangerous at play here. I need you to check your records. What do you have on one Nathaniel Forsyth?" At the mention of the name, Hughes stiffened, his fingers tightening around his pen. There was a fleeting moment of hesitation before he responded. "Forsyth?" Hughes repeated slowly. "I don't recall anyone by that name." "You sure you've got the right person?" Holmes leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Hughes. "I am certain, Inspector. He was a resident of Radnor Street, a man who, according to records, lived there not so long ago. Yet now, there is no mention of him. No mention anywhere." Hughes shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His face hardened, and he glanced toward the window, as if seeking some kind of refuge in the outside world. Holmes continued, his voice calm, but laden with authority. "We know this man existed, but someone, perhaps a force, has erased him from history. I need to know everything you have on him. Now." Hughes hesitated, then stood. "Fine, I'll see what I can do," he muttered under his breath. I watched as Hughes shuffled through the papers on his desk, pulling open drawers and flipping through records. The silence in the room was thick, almost suffocating. Holmes stood with his arms crossed, his eyes locked on Hughes as if willing the inspector to find something useful. Finally, Hughes let out an exasperated sigh. "You're right, Holmes. There's a man named Forsyth here, Nathaniel Forsyth. But there's something strange about it." He slid a piece of paper across the desk to us, his expression grave. "His name's on the list here, but there's no record of his death. No birth certificate. No family references. Just a line. And it ends just like that." Holmes' eyes gleamed with a triumphant gleam. "That's it," he murmured. "The missing piece. I leaned in closer to study the document. Hughes was right. There was nothing else. No other mention of Forsyth. No explanation. The entry was, quite simply, blank. "Holmes," I said, my voice tinged with apprehension. "If this man is real, and we know he existed, then why is it that not even the police have any trace of him? Why is his entire existence erased?" Holmes was silent for a long moment, his mind working through the layers of the mystery. Finally he spoke. This man was likely one of the Custodians' victims, a person who was erased to keep a secret buried. I frowned, unsure of how to process the magnitude of Holmes's words. But what was so important about him? Why erase him from history? Holmes turned to face me, his voice quiet but resolute. "I suspect that Forsyth held a key to the Custodians' power. Perhaps he knew too much, or maybe he was simply an unwitting witness. Either way, his disappearance is a sign that we are moving closer to the heart of this conspiracy." I felt a shiver run through me at the thought. A man erased from existence. It was a chilling possibility, one that felt less like fiction and more like an impending nightmare. Holmes turned back to Hughes. "We will be needing access to any files you have on Forsyth, any interactions he may have had with the police, any recorded statements, even photographs. If we are to understand why he was erased, we must uncover everything." Hughes sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'll see what I can dig up. But I'm warning you, Holmes, this doesn't feel right. People like Forsyth, people who vanish like that, are often better left alone." Holmes' lips curled into a small smile, though it was devoid of humor. "I never did well at leaving things alone, Inspector." With that, we left the constabulary and made our way back onto the fog-choked streets. The mystery was deepening, and with every clue, we seemed to be walking further into a web of shadows, a conspiracy that stretched far beyond what we could yet see. As we walked, I turned to Holmes, a question gnawing at me. "Do you think we're getting closer to uncovering the Custodians, Holmes? Are we even capable of confronting them?" Holmes' answer came in the form of a quiet chuckle, almost to himself. "We are already confronting them, Watson. And as for confronting them, well, that will be the greatest challenge of all." Chapter 6. The fog had not lifted by the time we returned to Baker Street. If anything, it had grown thicker, a pall of uncertainty and dread that seemed to hang over the city like a suffocating blanket. Holmes was unusually quiet, his mind clearly working through the details of the case. I could feel the weight of his thoughts pressing on him, yet he refused to share them openly. He was, as always, working several steps ahead, and the rest of us could only try to catch up. Once back in our rooms, Holmes wasted no time. He went straight to the desk, where he spread out the various records we had gathered. His fingers danced across the papers with practiced ease, his eyes scanning every word with sharp precision. I could tell that he was piecing something together, something that had been just out of reach until now. "Watson," he said without looking up, "we are dealing with a far more elaborate conspiracy than we first imagined. The Custodians, as we have learned, do not merely erase people from memory. They manipulate time itself, rewriting it as though it were clay in the hands of a sculptor. They control history by controlling the details, erasing those they deem inconvenient." I watched him closely, my mind racing. "But how do we fight something like that, Holmes? If they can rewrite reality, if they can make people disappear without a trace, how can we possibly hope to uncover the truth?" Holmes looked up from his papers, his eyes narrowing with a gleam that could only mean he had made a breakthrough. "We fight them with the one thing they cannot control, Watson. The truth. The truth, however fragmented, always finds a way to reveal itself, even in the face of their manipulation." I had never heard Holmes speak with such certainty. His confidence was unsettling, as if he had already come to some conclusion that I could not yet fathom. It was clear, however, that the pieces were coming together for him, even if they remained just out of my grasp. "We need to go back to Radnor Street," Holmes said suddenly, as if the thought had struck him all at once. "There is something there, something we missed, something that will give us the answers we need." We left Baker Street once again, the oppressive fog surrounding us as if trying to prevent us from reaching our destination. The journey to Radnor Street felt longer this time, as though the city itself was trying to slow us down. I could not help but feel the weight of Holmes' words. The truth always finds a way to reveal itself. We arrived at the once familiar street, which now felt alien in its stillness. The buildings, once full of life, were now shrouded in silence. It was as though the street had been forgotten by time itself, a place caught between memory and oblivion. Holmes, with his usual calm, led the way, his eyes scanning every detail with an intensity that suggested he had already noticed something I had missed. As we approached the end of the street, Holmes stopped in his tracks. He gestured toward an old, crumbling building that sat at the corner, its windows boarded up, its walls covered in a thick layer of ivy. It was a house that had clearly not been lived in for some time, but it was there, standing where it should not have been. "This is the house," Holmes said quietly, his voice tinged with both certainty and something darker. "The one that was erased. It exists, but only for those who are meant to see it, and I believe we are now among the few who can." I looked at the house, my heart pounding in my chest. It felt wrong, as though it were a mere shadow of a place, a spectre that had no right to be there. The air around it seemed heavier, thicker, as if the house itself was resisting the world around it. Holmes approached the front door, his hand hovering over the doorknob. "Prepare yourself, Watson," he said softly. "What we find inside may challenge everything we know about reality itself." The door creaked open, its sound sending a shiver down my spine. Holmes stepped inside first, his silhouette swallowed by the darkness within. I followed closely behind, my senses heightened as the smell of mildew and decay filled the air. The house was cold, unnervingly so, and the silence inside felt like a heavy, suffocating presence. We moved through the rooms in silence, each one more unsettling than the last. The walls were lined with portraits of long-forgotten individuals, their faces blurred and indistinct, as if their very existence had been wiped from history. In every corner, there was evidence of a life lived, but not a life remembered. Objects lay abandoned, gathering dust, their significance lost to time. In the back of the house, we found a study, its door ajar, as if waiting for us to enter. The room was filled with books, scattered papers, and the remnants of a desk that had once been used by someone who was now no longer there. Holmes moved toward the desk, his sharp eyes scanning the papers spread out before him. "Look here," he said, his voice suddenly intense. "These are the records of the Custodians, the very organization that has been erasing history." I approached cautiously, peering over his shoulder at the papers. They were written in a language I did not recognize, but Holmes seemed unfazed. "This is the key, Watson. These documents hold the truth that the Custodians have fought so hard to bury." Holmes continued to sift through the papers, his fingers tracing the text with precision. Then, as if he had found something vital, he stopped. He picked up a small, yellowed piece of paper and held it out to me. "This," he said quietly, "is the name of the person responsible for Forsyth's erasure, and with it the final link in the chain." I took the paper from him, my hands trembling, as I read the name scrawled in dark ink, Reginald Wetherby. Holmes looked at me, his expression grave. "Wetherby, Watson, is the key to everything. He is the one behind the Custodians, the one who holds the power to rewrite reality itself." I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. "Then we must stop him, before he erases everything." Holmes' eyes glinted with a mixture of resolve and something far darker. "It's too late for that, Watson. The question is no longer about stopping him. It's about whether we can survive what we now know. Chapter 7. The name Reginald Wetherby echoed in my mind as we stood in the dim light of the abandoned house. It felt as if the very air in the room had shifted with its mention, the walls closing in, pressing us deeper into the enigma that surrounded the Custodians. Holmes's calm demeanour belied the intensity of the moment, yet I could sense the same unsettling realization settling upon him. We had uncovered a piece of the puzzle, but the implications were far greater than either of us had anticipated. "We found the name Watson," Holmes said, breaking the heavy silence. "Now we must find Wetherby. He is the one controlling this manipulation of history, the one who holds the key to the Custodians' power. But we must be careful. He is not a man who leaves traces." I could feel the weight of Holmes' words pressing down on me. The air in the house had grown colder still, as if it were aware of the monumental discovery we had made. I shivered involuntarily, trying to suppress the feeling that we were standing on the precipice of something far darker than a simple case of historical manipulation. Holmes, however, seemed unaffected. His focus was razor-sharp, his mind already racing through the next series of steps. "There is more to this house, Watson, more that we have yet to uncover." We moved through the rooms once again, but this time with purpose, searching for anything that could lead us closer to Wetherby. The house, despite its unsettling aura, had an uncanny stillness to it, as though it were a place suspended outside of time, frozen in an eternal moment of oblivion. But Holmes was not so easily deterred. He moved with quiet determination, examining each piece of furniture, each book, each discarded piece of paper. He was looking for something, a hidden clue, an overlooked detail, something that could tell us more. In the far corner of the study, a faded rug caught his attention. Without a word, he lifted the corner, revealing a trapdoor beneath. It was hidden well, so well, in fact, that I hadn't noticed it until now. Holmes' eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction as he knelt beside the door, his fingers tracing the edges of the metal latch. "I had suspected this," he murmured almost to himself. "There's always a hidden room, Watson, and this one may hold the truth we seek." I felt my pulse quicken. The very notion of a hidden room, one that had likely been untouched for years, sent a ripple of unease through me. It was as though we were about to uncover the last piece of a terrible secret. Holmes, however, was unperturbed. He flipped the latch with a swift motion, and the trapdoor creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "We'll have to go in, Watson," Holmes said, his voice steady, though there was a flicker of something darker in his eyes. "Whatever lies below is the final key to this mystery." I nodded, though my throat was dry, my nerves on edge. I followed Holmes as he descended first, the creaking steps echoing in the silence of the house. As we reached the bottom, I was struck by the sheer cold that seemed to emanate from the stone walls. It was as though the air itself had grown thick with a presence, an unseen force that hung heavily in the room. Holmes stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he took in the surroundings. The room was small, lined with shelves filled with old books, artifacts, and strange objects. But what caught my attention was the large wooden desk in the center, its surface cluttered with papers, some of which were yellowed with age, others hastily scrawled with ink. The room, despite its eerie atmosphere, had an odd sense of order to it, like a hidden sanctuary for those who wished to keep their secrets safe. Holmes moved toward the desk, his fingers brushing across the papers with practiced care. He picked up one document after another, his eyes scanning each one with intensity. "This is it, Watson," he said suddenly, his voice cold. "This is the heart of the Custodians' operation." I stepped closer, my gaze falling on the papers before me. It was difficult to make sense of the symbols and strange handwriting, but I could see enough to understand the gravity of what Holmes had discovered. The documents detailed a series of events that had been carefully manipulated, erased, and rewritten to suit the Custodians' needs. There were references to individuals, to families, to entire histories that had been altered or obliterated. And in the centre of it all was Reginald Wetherby, the man who had orchestrated it all. "These are the records of the Custodians," Holmes said softly, his voice laced with both awe and distaste. "These documents prove their existence and their control over history itself." I felt a chill creep up my spine. But what do they want, Holmes? Why erase people and places? Why rewrite the very fabric of our reality? Holmes turned to me, his expression dark. "To control the narrative, Watson. To control what is remembered and what is forgotten. History is power, and the Custodians are the ones who shape it. Wetherby is the one who has been pulling the strings all along. But now we must confront him." I looked around the room, my thoughts racing. Where do we find him, Holmes? How do we confront someone who has the power to manipulate reality itself? Holmes' eyes gleamed with determination. "We confront him by following the trail he's left behind, Watson, and I believe it leads us to a place we've already been, Radnor Street. We left the hidden room with the documents in hand, the weight of our discovery pressing down on us like an invisible force. As we made our way back through the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had uncovered something far more dangerous than we had anticipated. We were no longer just chasing a mysterious disappearance. We were chasing something far darker, something that threatened to consume us all." As we stepped back into the cold, fog-laden night, Holmes' voice broke the silence. "We're not done yet, Watson. Wetherby is still out there, and we will find him. But we must be cautious. The Custodians will stop at nothing to protect their secret." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. We were in this now, deep, far deeper than I had ever imagined. And there was no turning back. Chapter 8. The fog clung to the streets as we made our way back to Radnor Street. The atmosphere had grown heavier, the mist swirling around us like a living entity, its tendrils reaching out to obscure everything in its path. The air was damp, and the ground slick with rain, yet neither the chill nor the oppressive silence deterred Holmes. His mind, I knew, was already racing ahead, calculating each step of our investigation. "We are close, Watson," he said quietly, as if speaking to himself, but his words carried a weight of certainty. "Every clue has led us to this moment, and now we must confront Wetherby." I glanced at Holmes, noting the grim determination in his features. The Custodians had grown from a mere theory into a very real, very dangerous presence. What had once seemed like an abstract mystery was now a looming threat, one that could reshape the world as we knew it. Yet even as the enormity of the situation pressed down on me, I felt the pull of Holmes' resolve, as always unwavering in the face of danger. As we neared the site of the vanished house, I couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in the landscape. The street, which had once been home to the mysterious building, now appeared eerily unchanged, as if time itself had been manipulated to obscure the truth. The houses on either side stood silent, their windows dark, and yet the air was thick with the sense that something was hidden just beyond the reach of our perception. Holmes stopped before a small, unassuming doorway at the end of Radnor Street, a building I had not noticed before. It seemed out of place among the other structures, its architecture older, its windows shuttered and tightly closed. Holmes' eyes locked onto it with a piercing gaze. "This," he said softly, "is where we find Wetherby, or at least where we find the last traces of him." I looked at the building, feeling a deep unease settle within me. Something about it felt wrong, as if it had always been there, lurking in the background of our investigation, waiting for us to notice. I took a step forward, but Holmes held up a hand to stop me. "We must be careful, Watson," he warned. "This place is likely to be full of the Custodians' influence. We are stepping into their domain now, and they will not welcome us." Holmes turned the handle and pushed open the door, his movements deliberate, measured. The creak of the door echoed in the silence of the street, and I followed closely behind, feeling the weight of the decision hanging over us. The interior of the building was dimly lit, the shadows stretching long across the floor. Dust lingered in the air, undisturbed by any recent activity. The space felt abandoned, as if it had been forgotten by time itself, but there was something about it, a sense that the space was merely waiting for something, waiting for us. Holmes stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the room. He moved toward the far side, where a large desk stood in the corner. Papers were scattered across its surface, their edges curled with age. Holmes sifted through the documents quickly, his eyes scanning each one with a practiced efficiency. He didn't waste time on irrelevant details, always moving forward toward the heart of the matter. "There is something here, Watson," Holmes said, his voice low. "Wetherby's influence, his records, everything. This place is not just a hideout. It's a place where history has been manipulated, hidden from the public eye." I moved closer, my curiosity piqued. Holmes handed me one of the documents he had pulled from the desk. It was a list of names, some of which were crossed out, others written in bold, deliberate ink. Each name appeared to be linked to an event that, according to the document, had been erased from public memory. But what struck me most was the name at the top of the list, Reginald Wetherby. "This is the key," Holmes said quietly, his voice full of conviction. Wetherby was not just the leader of the Custodians. He was the architect of their power. These records, Watson, are proof that they have been erasing entire histories, rewriting them as they see fit. I looked at Holmes, feeling the weight of his words. The Custodians were not merely rewriting the lives of individuals, they were rewriting history itself. And Wetherby was at the center of it all, orchestrating the chaos from the shadows. Holmes turned toward me, his expression hardening. "Wetherby must be stopped, Watson. If we do not act quickly, he will continue to manipulate history, erasing anyone and anything that stands in his way." But before I could respond, a sound from the other side of the room caught our attention. It was a faint creak, the sound of footsteps moving through the darkness. My heart raced as I glanced toward Holmes, who had already begun to move toward the source of the noise. "Stay close, Watson," Holmes whispered. "We may not be alone." We crept through the room, our footsteps muffled by the thick layers of dust that coated the floor. The shadows seemed to shift around us, as if something unseen was watching, waiting. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, a growing sense of unease gnawing at me. Holmes reached the far wall, where a small door was hidden behind a tapestry. Without a word he opened it, revealing a narrow staircase leading downward into darkness. He turned to me, his eyes narrowing. "This is it," he said, "the heart of Wetherby's operation, the place where he has been manipulating everything. We must go down." I nodded, my throat dry. It felt as if we were walking toward something we could not fully comprehend, a place where the very fabric of reality might come apart at the seams. As we descended the stairs, the air grew colder, the darkness deeper. The faint echo of our footsteps was the only sound that filled the silence. And then, as we reached the bottom, I felt it, a presence in the air, something ancient and powerful, like the weight of countless forgotten memories pressing down upon us. Holmes stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room. "This is where it all began, Watson, the place where Wetherby started his work." I followed him into the room, my heart racing, and then I saw it. At the center of the room was a large ornate mirror, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. But the reflection was wrong. It wasn't just us standing there. There were other figures, shadowy, indistinct shapes that seemed to shift and change with every glance. Holmes stood still, his eyes locked on the mirror. "This is where history is rewritten, Watson," he whispered. "This is the heart of Wetherby's power." Chapter 9. The mirror before us was not like any ordinary reflective surface. The air around it shimmered unnaturally, as though the very fabric of reality was distorting in its presence. The shapes within the mirror twisted and blurred, their features momentarily appearing familiar before warping into something else entirely, as though they were reflections of lives that never truly existed. Holmes stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the mirror with a mixture of fascination and trepidation. "This is it, Watson," Holmes said softly, almost as if speaking to himself. "This is the nexus of their power." I stood beside him, unable to tear my gaze away from the shifting image. The room around us seemed to fade into the background, the walls stretching away into nothingness. The only thing that felt real, tangible, was the mirror, its distorted reflection of a world that no longer seemed to adhere to the laws of time or space. "I don't understand, Holmes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What is this mirror? How can it be controlling history?" Holmes stepped forward, his fingers hovering just inches from the glass. He seemed to be measuring it, studying it in ways I could not comprehend. "This is no mere mirror, Watson. This is a device of incredible power, one that has allowed Wetherby and his custodians to rewrite history itself. By manipulating the reflections within this mirror, they can erase people, places, even entire events from the world's memory. What they choose to reflect in this glass becomes reality. What they remove simply ceases to exist." I felt a chill run through me as Holmes spoke. The implications were staggering. A mirror that could alter reality, bend time, and erase the very existence of anything it reflected. It sounded like madness, but the proof was right before us. I could feel the weight of it, the crushing sense that reality itself was fragile, a mere construct that could be torn apart by those who wielded the power to manipulate it. "So Wetherby, he's been using this mirror to erase people," I murmured. "To erase history itself." Holmes nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the mirror. "Precisely, Watson. And the truth is, Wetherby has been doing this for far longer than we could have imagined. He has been rewriting history, erasing inconvenient truths, and ensuring that the world remembers only what he allows it to." I took a step forward, my mind racing. And Forsyth? What was his role in all of this? Holmes' eyes flickered to the mirror, his expression hardening. "Forsyth was a witness, Watson. A man who knew too much about Wetherby's plan. And for that he was erased. His memory, his existence, all of it was scrubbed from history. But something went wrong. Forsyth's erasure left behind a trace, a lingering connection to the truth. That is why we are here now. The Custodians have underestimated the power of this mirror. It was never meant to reveal its secrets." I stood silently for a moment, the weight of the situation settling in. "So, what now, Holmes? If Wetherby is behind all of this, and if this mirror is his tool, how do we stop it? How do we undo what he's done?" Holmes remained silent for a moment, his gaze shifting from the mirror to the shadowy figures that still seemed to swirl within it. He exhaled slowly, as if calculating his next move. "We must confront Wetherby, Watson. We must find him and put an end to his manipulation of reality. The question is not simply how to stop him, but whether it is even possible to restore what he has erased. The mirror, it is not just a tool with erasure. It is a weapon. And once someone has been erased, they are lost forever." I felt a sinking feeling in my chest. But if Wetherby can erase people from existence, what's to stop him from erasing us as well? From erasing everything? Holmes' expression hardened, his jaw setting in a firm line. "That is exactly why we must act quickly, Watson. If we do not stop Wetherby, he will erase not just us, but everything we have worked for. All of it will vanish as though it never existed. The truth will be erased, and the world will be left to the mercy of the Custodians." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on me. The very fabric of our reality was at stake, and we were standing on the precipice of something far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The Custodians, led by Wetherby, had the power to reshape history, to bend time itself. If we did not stop them, there would be no truth left to uncover, no memory of what had come before. The world would be nothing but a blank slate, shaped by those who controlled it. "We must find Wetherby," Holmes said, his voice now low and determined, "and we must do so before it's too late." We left the hidden room and made our way back through the house, each step heavier than the last. The weight of our discovery pressed down on me, but Holmes was already moving with purpose, his mind already focused on the next step. There was no time to waste. We had uncovered the heart of the Custodians' power, and now we had to take action before it was all erased. As we stepped back into the night, I could feel the change in the air. The fog, which had seemed so oppressive before, now felt almost suffocating. It was as though the world itself was closing in on us, and the only way forward was through the darkness. "We must head to Wetherby's last known location," Holmes said, his voice steady despite the danger that lay ahead. "It's the only way to confront him. He won't be easy to find, but we have no choice." I nodded, my resolve hardening. The truth was within our grasp, but so was the danger that came with it. The Custodians would stop at nothing to keep their secret hidden, and if we were to succeed, we had to be prepared for whatever lay ahead. As we made our way through the fog-choked streets, I couldn't help but wonder if we were walking into a trap. But there was no turning back now. The mirror had revealed the truth, and we would confront it, no matter the cost. Chapter 10. The streets of London had never felt so alien. The fog, thick as it had been the entire night, seemed to twist and curl around us like a living thing, resisting our every step. We walked quickly, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break, waiting for us to make the first move in a game that had already been set in motion long before we arrived. Holmes moved with his usual precision, each stride purposeful, his mind clearly racing through the countless permutations of the mystery. I, on the other hand, felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The Custodians, those shadowy figures who controlled history itself, had already erased people, places, and entire events from existence. What chance did we have against such power? Yet, despite my growing unease, there was a strange resolve within me as well. Holmes and I were far from ordinary men, and we had seen our share of impossible cases. But this felt different, as if we were standing at the precipice of something that could unravel not just our understanding of the world, but the very fabric of reality itself. "We need to find Wetherby," I said quietly, more to myself than to Holmes. "But where do we even begin?" Holmes glanced back at me, his eyes steady and calculating. "We begin where he is most likely to be hiding." The last known location of Wetherby was a warehouse along the Thames. It was a place where the Custodians once operated freely before they began to cover their tracks. The name Wetherby still lingered in my mind, as it had done for the past few days. Reginald Wetherby, the architect of the Custodians' power, the man who had been erasing history for years. We had learned so much, yet I felt as if we had barely scratched the surface. If we were to confront him, we needed to understand how far his influence reached, how far he was willing to go. As we made our way toward the docks, the fog thickened, narrowing our vision with every step. Holmes was undeterred, his mind clearly focused on the task at hand. I, however, couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking straight into a trap. Wetherby had to know we were coming. If the Custodians could manipulate history, surely they could manipulate the present as well. The sound of the Thames crashing against the piers grew louder as we neared the warehouse. Holmes stopped in front of a large, weather-beaten building, its windows boarded up, and its entrance hidden in shadow. The faintest flicker of light could be seen through a crack in the boards, suggesting that it was still in use, though by whom we could not yet say. "This is it," Holmes said, his voice low. "We've found his lair." I took a steadying breath. The anticipation was palpable. My heart pounded in my chest as we approached the door, each step resonating with the weight of what we might find inside. If Wetherby had truly been hiding here, then we were about to confront the very heart of the Custodians' power. Holmes turned to me, his face impassive. "Stay alert, Watson. The Custodians are not the type to leave things to chance. If they know we are coming, we must be prepared for anything." I nodded, my hand instinctively moving to the side-arm beneath my coat. We had no way of knowing what awaited us, but one thing was certain. The deeper we delved into this mystery, the more we risked losing ourselves in its shadows. Holmes pushed open the door with a soft creak, and we stepped inside. The warehouse was vast, the ceiling towering above us, shrouded in darkness. There was no sign of life, no immediate danger, but the air felt thick with the weight of something hidden, something waiting. We moved cautiously through the room, the floor creaking beneath our feet as we made our way deeper into the shadows. Then suddenly the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, followed by the unmistakable click of a door being unlocked. Holmes tensed. "Stay close, Watson," he murmured. "We're not alone." I followed his lead, stepping lightly, my senses heightened. The footsteps grew louder, approaching from the far end of the warehouse. In the dim light, I could just make out the shadowy figure of a man moving swiftly toward us. Holmes held up a hand, signaling for me to remain silent. The figure was tall, his movements deliberate and controlled. As he neared, I could see the glint of recognition in his eyes. It was Wetherby. He stopped a few feet from us, his cold gaze locking with Holmes's. The tension in the room was palpable, the silence stretching between us like a razor's edge. "You found me, Mr. Holmes," Wetherby said, his voice smooth and composed, though I could sense an underlying threat in his tone. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You've always been far more persistent than most." Holmes took a step forward, his posture rigid with the same calm resolve I had come to expect from him. "You've erased everything, Wetherby," he said. "Everything you've touched, everything you've altered. It will all be undone. Your reign ends tonight." Wetherby's lips curled into a slight smile. "You still don't understand, do you, Holmes? What you call erasure is merely the beginning of a new order. The old world, the world of truth and memory, it was never meant to be. What I've done for a greater purpose." I stepped forward, my voice tinged with disbelief. "A greater purpose? You've been erasing people from existence, entire histories, Wetherby. There's nothing noble in that. You've been playing with lives, and you're willing to destroy everything for your own vision of the future." Wetherby's smile faded, and his eyes grew colder. "History is nothing but a collection of memories, Watson. Memories that can be manipulated, rewritten, erased entirely. And those who control the past control the future." Holmes' voice remained steady, though I could hear the underlying intensity. "And yet, Wetherby, you have made one fatal mistake. History cannot be erased completely. It always leaves traces, and those traces are what will bring you down." Wetherby's expression darkened, and I could feel the atmosphere shift, the tension rising like a storm waiting to break. "You think you can stop me," he hissed. "You think you can undo what I've done." Holmes stepped forward again, his eyes never leaving Wetherby's. "We don't have to undo it, Wetherby. We just have to stop it from happening to anyone else." Chapter 11. The air in the warehouse had grown thick, heavy with tension. Wetherby stood before us, his expression unreadable, his posture still, like a predator watching its prey. His cold gaze never wavered from Holmes, and I could feel the force of his presence in the room, an ominous, suffocating pressure that made every breath feel harder to take. Holmes stood firm, his stance unwavering, but his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, never left Wetherby. There was a strange stillness in his gaze, as though he were weighing not just the man before him, but the consequences of the words he was about to speak. "You've manipulated history for long enough, Wetherby," Holmes said, his voice low and controlled. "Your reach may have been vast, but it has limits. You cannot control everything." Wetherby's lips twitched into the faintest of smiles, but there was no humor in it. "Limits," he scoffed. "You still don't understand, do you, Holmes? I've already won. History is nothing but a construct. I've removed the pieces I didn't want, and the rest will fall into place exactly as I've designed it. There's no undoing what I've done." I could see the tension building in Holmes's jaw. He was not one to show emotion, but even I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Wetherby's power, his ability to erase people, places, and entire histories, was unlike anything we had encountered before. It was as if we were facing a force that transcended the normal rules of reality, a force that could warp the very fabric of time itself. "What you've done is nothing but a twisted illusion," Holmes countered, his voice gaining strength. "You've rewritten history, yes, but you can't control the truth. The truth always finds a way to reveal itself." Wetherby's face darkened, his eyes narrowing into a cold, calculating glare. "The truth," he spat. "What truth?" "The one you cling to, Watson. The one that says there's some higher order, some unchanging reality. History is not fixed, it's malleable. I've shown you that. And now it's too late for you to stop me." I stepped forward, my voice trembling slightly but steady. "You've played God, Wetherby. You've stolen people's lives, their memories. You've made them vanish as if they never mattered." Wetherby's expression faltered for a brief moment, an imperceptible flicker of doubt crossing his face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "I did what was necessary," he said, his voice hardening again. "What I've done is for the greater good. The world needs to be shaped, Watson. It needs to be molded into something better. And if that means erasing a few inconvenient truths, then so be it." I could feel my pulse quicken, the weight of his words sinking in. He was convinced, utterly convinced, that what he was doing was right. But I knew Holmes wouldn't be swayed, not by logic, not by anything. Holmes had always believed in the power of truth, and he had never backed down from a fight. "I don't think you understand the danger you've created, Wetherby," Holmes said, his voice now filled with a quiet intensity. "You've used the mirror, the device you call your tool of erasure, to alter reality itself. But even now, as you stand here, you're forgetting something fundamental. You cannot control everything." Wetherby stepped closer, his eyes flashing with contempt. "You've lost, Holmes. This game is over." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence in the warehouse stretched between us, thick and oppressive, like the calm before a storm. I could feel the tension crackling in the air, the anticipation building as we prepared for what would come next. Then Holmes spoke again, his voice steady, but filled with the unshakable confidence that I had come to rely on. "History, Wetherby, is not merely a collection of events that can be manipulated at will. It is the sum of all lives, all experiences, all actions, and you cannot erase the lives of those who have truly made an impact. They will always leave a mark. It doesn't matter what you do. The truth cannot be erased." Wetherby faltered for a moment, the uncertainty creeping back into his eyes. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice edged with a hint of disbelief. "The truth," Holmes replied, his gaze sharp and unyielding, "is not just what is remembered. It is also what is forgotten. You cannot erase the emotions, the connections, the very essence of the people you've tried to remove. You've been erasing people from history, but you've underestimated something you didn't account for." Holmes took a step forward, his voice rising in intensity. "The connections between people, Watson, are the key. The bonds we share, the memories we create, they transcend time. No amount of manipulation, no matter how powerful, come remove the essence of what makes us who we are. Your mirror, your power to erase, can alter the world, but it cannot control the truth that lies at its core. I looked at Holmes, seeing the certainty in his eyes. He was right. Wetherby had been playing with forces beyond his understanding, trying to bend them to his will. But in doing so, he had failed to see the one thing that could never be erased: the human spirit. Holmes turned back to Wetherby, his voice firm. You cannot win, Wetherby. You can manipulate history, but you cannot control what people hold dear. And in the end, it is the truth that will prevail. You will be remembered for your actions, for the lives you've stolen, but the world will move on. History will remember you, no matter what you do. Wetherby's face contorted with fury, his eyes flashing with a desperate need to hold onto his control. You think you've won, Holmes, he hissed. You think you can stop me. Holmes' lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. I don't need to stop you, Wetherby. I only need to expose the truth. There was a sharp crack, a flash of light, and suddenly the mirror behind Wetherby flickered violently. For a moment, the air seemed to warp around it, as though the fabric of reality itself was stretching and tearing. Wetherby's expression shifted from anger to confusion, and then to panic. He reached out, his hand trembling, as if he were trying to hold onto something that was slipping through his fingers. But it was too late. Chapter 12. The mirror seemed to pulse with energy, its surface rippling like water disturbed by a stone. The room around us grew colder, and for a moment I thought I could hear distant whispers, fragments of voices that seemed to come from all directions. Wetherby's expression had gone from shock to terror as the mirror's glow intensified, casting eerie shadows across his face. What is this? Wetherby gasped, his voice barely a whisper as he stepped back, eyes wide with fear. What have you done? Holmes didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the shifting mirror, where the reflections seemed to twist and writhe as if alive. The figures within the glass blurred, morphing between familiar faces and strange, unfamiliar shapes. I could feel the very air vibrating with some force beyond our comprehension, a distortion of reality that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Holmes spoke finally, his voice low, almost reverential. This, Wetherby, is the truth that you've been hiding, the truth that you tried so desperately to erase. Wetherby's eyes darted from Holmes to the mirror, and then to me, his body trembling as the light from the glass grew brighter, more insistent. No, this can't be happening. His words were frantic now, his usual composure shattered by the realization that something was slipping beyond his control. I made sure it would be erased, that no one would remember. You never understood, did you? Holmes said, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding before us. You thought you could control everything, rewrite history, erase those you deemed unimportant. But the truth, Wetherby, always finds a way to surface. It cannot be silenced forever. I glanced at Holmes, unsure of what he meant. The mirror, which had once seemed like a mere tool of manipulation, now felt like something else entirely, something ancient, something that connected the past, present, and future. And as the light from the mirror pulsed, I could feel my own memories flickering, shifting in strange ways. Faces I had long forgotten appeared before me, as though they had always been there, hidden behind the veil of time. Wetherby stumbled backward, his face ashen. You don't know what you're meddling with, he muttered, his voice cracking. You can't control this. You'll undo everything I've worked for. Holmes's gaze never wavered. It's not you who controls it, Wetherby. This mirror, this device, it has always been a tool. But it's not the tool that matters, it's the truth behind it. And truth is something you can never erase. The mirror seemed to pulse once more, the light intensifying until it was almost blinding. Wetherby recoiled, his hands raised, as if trying to shield himself from the oncoming storm of light and truth. But it was already too late. The air around us grew unbearably heavy, and I felt as though the very ground beneath my feet was shifting, pulling away from reality. The whispers in the room grew louder, the reflections in the mirror becoming more vivid, more tangible. I saw faces of people long forgotten, of events erased from memory. The past, the present, and the future seemed to collapse into one single point, and for a moment I could not tell what was real and what was a distortion. Then, with a sharp crack, the mirror shattered. The room seemed to breathe a collective sigh, and the oppressive pressure in the air lifted, leaving an eerie calm in its wake. The fragments of glass fell to the floor, sparkling like shards of stars in the dim light. The mirror, the thing that had held the power to rewrite reality itself, was now nothing but broken glass scattered at our feet. Wetherby was on his knees, his hands pressed to his forehead, as if trying to hold on to something that was slipping away from him. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Holmes stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "I've exposed the truth, Wetherby, the truth you tried to erase, and in doing so, I've freed those you sought to erase." I could feel the weight of his words as they hung in the air. It wasn't just the mirror that had been broken. It was the illusion of control that Wetherby had held over reality itself. The truth, once hidden, had been unleashed. Wetherby's body trembled as he looked up at Holmes, his face a mask of despair. "You don't understand," he whispered. "This was never about control. It was about saving the world, saving everything from the chaos that would consume it." Holmes knelt beside him, his expression unreadable. "And what you didn't understand, Wetherby, is that the world is not meant to be controlled. It is meant to be remembered, in all its beauty and its flaws. The past cannot be erased. The future cannot be rewritten, and no one, no matter how powerful, has the right to decide who gets to be remembered and who gets to be forgotten." Wetherby looked up at Holmes, his eyes empty of the conviction that had once driven him. I thought I was protecting it all. I thought I was doing what was necessary." "You were only protecting your own vision," Holmes replied softly. "A vision built on lies and manipulation." I watched as Wetherby's shoulders slumped, his once proud figure now reduced to a broken man. The Custodians' power, their ability to alter history, had been shattered, not by force, but by the undeniable truth that had been hidden for so long. It was a truth that no mirror could reflect, no device could control, and no person could erase. Holmes turned away from Wetherby, his gaze shifting to the broken pieces of the mirror scattered on the floor. He knelt to pick up one of the shards, studying it carefully. "The mirror is gone," he said, almost to himself. "But the damage it caused remains. It will take time to repair what has been undone. And some things may never be restored." I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. The world would never be the same after what we had uncovered. The Custodians were gone, but the echoes of their actions would remain like scars on the fabric of reality. "Is it over, Holmes?" I asked quietly. Holmes stood, his expression as determined as ever. "For now, Watson, but history will always have its secrets, and there will always be those who try to control them." I looked back at Wetherby, still kneeling on the ground, his face pale and haunted. There was no triumph in his defeat, only the quiet, lingering presence of a man who had lost everything he had once believed in. For a long moment, neither Holmes nor I spoke. The truth had been restored, but the cost of that restoration had yet to fully reveal itself. Chapter 13. The warehouse was silent now, the broken mirror lying in scattered pieces around us like the remnants of a shattered reality. Wetherby remained on his knees, his expression vacant, as he processed the loss of everything he had fought to control. I could see that the fight had gone out of him. His defiance had crumbled, replaced by an empty acknowledgement of his failure. Holmes stood near the shattered mirror, his gaze distant, as though he were considering the full weight of what had just transpired. The intensity that had burned within him throughout the investigation had not diminished, but now there was something else in his eyes, something akin to sorrow. "Holmes," I said quietly, stepping closer, "is it truly over?" Holmes did not answer immediately. He remained focused on the debris at his feet, his brow furrowed as though he were searching for something hidden beneath the broken glass. Finally, after a long pause, he turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "It's never truly over, Watson," he said, his voice steady, but tinged with a somber tone. "The Custodians may have been defeated, but their influence will linger. What they sought to control, it's been lost, but not without consequence." I felt a chill at his words. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. The world had been altered, twisted by forces we could barely comprehend, and now, even though the mirror was gone, I had the distinct feeling that something irreversible had taken place. Wetherby, still kneeling in defeat, looked up at Holmes. His voice, when he spoke, was a hollow echo of the man he had once been. "You've undone everything, everything I worked for," he whispered, as if the words were too heavy to speak aloud. Holmes approached him, his steps measured and deliberate. "You didn't work for anything, Wetherby. You bent the truth to fit your needs. You manipulated history as though it were clay in your hands, and in doing so, you lost sight of what was truly important." Wetherby's shoulders slumped even further. "And what is that? What is so important that it's worth everything I've lost?" Holmes' eyes softened slightly, though his voice remained firm. "The truth, Wetherby, the truth is what matters. It is the one thing that cannot be erased, no matter how hard you try. It is the foundation upon which everything else is built." Wetherby's eyes flickered with a brief, painful understanding. "The truth," he muttered, almost as if tasting the word for the first time. "The one thing I could never control." I stepped forward, my voice breaking the heavy silence. "You've erased memories, erased lives, but you couldn't control the one thing that always slips through the cracks, our need to remember." Holmes nodded, his gaze never leaving Wetherby. "Exactly, Watson. The people you erased may be gone from history, but their stories are not. They exist in the memories of those who knew them. They exist in the hearts of those who loved them. And that cannot be taken away." The weight of Holmes' words settled over me, and I could feel the truth of them as they hung in the air. The Custodians had tried to control history, but the very nature of memory, of human connection, had always remained beyond their reach. People are defined not by what is written in the annals of history, but by the lives they touch, the stories they leave behind. Wetherby stood slowly, his face still pale, but no longer filled with defiance. "So, what happens now?" he asked, his voice softer now. "What happens to me?" Holmes looked at him for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You will face the consequences of your actions, Wetherby. You can't erase the damage you've done. But perhaps in time you can find some measure of redemption." Wetherby nodded slowly, the weight of his choices finally settling on him. "I thought I was saving the world, but all I did was break it." "We all make choices, Wetherby," Holmes replied. "It's what we do with those choices that define us." I watched as Wetherby stood there, his gaze fixed on the shattered mirror, as though seeking something within its broken reflections. For a moment I thought he might collapse again, consumed by the weight of his regrets, but instead he simply exhaled slowly and turned toward the door. "You've won," he said, his voice distant. "But in the end, it's the truth that will outlast us all." Holmes and I left the warehouse, the weight of the night's events heavy on our shoulders. The fog had finally begun to lift, and the first light of dawn was beginning to filter through the mist. The city, for all its darkness, seemed to breathe a little easier with the knowledge that the Custodians' grip had been loosened. But even as I walked beside Holmes, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed forever. We had won a victory, yes, but at what cost? The truth had been restored, but the mirror, the power to erase history, had left a scar on the world. We would never be the same, and neither would anyone else who had been touched by this terrible conspiracy. "We've done it, Holmes," I said, breaking the silence. "We've stopped Wetherby. We've undone the Custodians' work." Holmes looked at me, his expression calm, but there was something else in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. "Yes, Watson, we've stopped them, but the cost of truth is always higher than we expect." As we walked through the quiet streets, I couldn't help but feel that Holmes was right. The truth, no matter how powerful, was never without its consequences, and in a world where history could be rewritten, where memories could be erased, perhaps the only real victory was to hold on to the truth as best we could, no matter what it cost. Chapter 14. The world seemed to breathe easier as Holmes and I made our way back to Baker Street. The fog that had once seemed so oppressive had lifted, revealing the quiet streets of London in the pale light of early morning. The distant hum of the city was barely audible, the stillness a stark contrast to the storm we had just weathered. Despite the victory we had secured over Wetherby and the Custodians, a lingering unease remained. The truth had been restored, but the path to that truth had come at a steep price. Wetherby's actions, his manipulation of history, had left scars that we might never fully understand. And though we had uncovered the heart of his operation, the question still lingered: had we truly undone the damage, or had we merely delayed its inevitable return? As we entered our familiar rooms at Baker Street, I felt the weight of the past few days press upon me. The case had consumed us both, leading us down a rabbit hole of hidden truths and dark secrets, each revelation more unsettling than the last. Yet now, as we stood at the threshold of a world that had been irrevocably changed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over. Holmes had already moved to the desk, his mind clearly turning over the details of the case in a way I could never fully follow. I could see the strain in his eyes, the exhaustion that came from facing a mystery so profound, so tangled, that it had threatened to unravel the very fabric of reality. "Holmes," I said quietly, "do you think it's really over? Wetherby's defeat, the mirror, it feels as if something still remains, something we haven't accounted for." Holmes looked up, his gaze steady, but there was an edge to his expression that spoke of the same uncertainty I had been feeling. "It's never truly over, Watson. History has a way of resurfacing, no matter how much we try to bury it. Wetherby may be gone, but his influence, his actions, have left marks that will take far longer to erase." I nodded, understanding his words. The Custodians' hold on history had been broken, but the cracks they had left behind would not heal quickly. We had exposed the truth, yes, but in doing so, we had opened a door to a past that was never meant to be seen. "There will be those who try to follow in Wetherby's footsteps," Holmes continued, his voice cold and calculating. "Others who will seek to control history, to erase what they find inconvenient. The battle isn't over, Watson. It's simply shifted." The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. I had known that our victory, while significant, was not the end of the story. The Custodians had only been one faction in a larger game, one whose rules we could barely begin to understand. I sat down in my usual chair, trying to process the enormity of everything we had uncovered. The mirror, the erasures, Wetherby's twisted vision. It was all so much to bear. But even as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, I couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of dread. "Do you think we've done enough?" I asked, my voice soft. "Will history, as we know it, ever be the same?" Holmes's gaze softened for a brief moment before he spoke. "I don't know, Watson. But what I do know is that we've done what we can. The truth is out. And though the consequences of that truth may be far-reaching, we've given people the chance to remember what they've lost." I exhaled slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. The truth had been restored, but that truth was not something easily digested. The world had changed, not just for us, but for everyone who had ever been touched by Wetherby's manipulations. What would they remember? What had they lost in the process? "We've opened the door, Watson," Holmes continued, his voice steady. "But the world will decide what to do with what lies beyond it." I nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of hope and uncertainty. The truth had a way of changing everything, and now it was up to those who remembered to shape the future. But as Holmes returned his attention to the papers on his desk, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were only at the beginning of something much larger. The Custodians might be gone, but there were still forces at play, forces that we had only just begun to understand. The days that followed were quiet, the world seemingly returning to its usual rhythms. But I could sense the undercurrent of change, the subtle shift that had occurred within the very fabric of time itself. I wondered how many others had felt it, how many had noticed the absence of things they could no longer remember, the history they could no longer recall. Holmes remained his usual self, his mind always one step ahead, but I could see the toll the case had taken on him. He had always been driven by his pursuit of truth, but now I wondered if he was starting to question the very nature of that truth. "Watson," Holmes said one evening as he looked up from his papers, his face thoughtful, "we've uncovered something far deeper than we anticipated. But there are always those who will try to rewrite the world in their own image. And while we've stopped Wetherby, I don't believe we've seen the last of them." "Who are they, Holmes?" I asked, unable to hide the curiosity that had grown within me. "The ones who would follow in Wetherby's footsteps." Holmes leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the desk. "The Custodians were just the beginning, Watson. The truth is a powerful thing, and while we may have exposed their work, we've only scratched the surface of a much larger conspiracy, one that's been brewing for centuries, and it will take more than just us to stop it." I sat there for a long time, letting his words sink in. The case was over, for now, but the larger question remained. Who else was out there, working to rewrite history? And how long before the world would be faced with another truth, one that could undo everything we had fought for? Chapter 15. The days following our confrontation with Wetherby seemed almost too calm, eerily so. The fog that had once dominated the streets of London had dissipated, leaving behind crisp air and a city that seemed to exhale with relief. Yet, despite the sense of resolution, a part of me felt as though we were standing on the edge of something far deeper, something that had yet to fully reveal itself. Holmes, however, was a man who did not dwell long on past victories, especially not one as fleeting as this. While I pondered the aftermath of our case, he buried himself in his work. I often found him at his desk, scribbling notes, his mind clearly racing ahead, devising theories and strategies to address whatever new danger he sensed. It was during one of these quiet mornings that I first noticed the subtle change. Holmes had not been in the best of spirits for days, though that was nothing unusual in itself, but there was something different in his demeanor that morning, a quiet unease perhaps, or a sense of anticipation, as though he were waiting for something to happen. As I entered our sitting room, I found him staring out the window, his eyes narrowed against the bright daylight as if searching for something. The usual sharpness in his gaze was clouded by a faint wariness, a sense that even the greatest detective had become aware of forces far beyond his understanding. "Holmes," I said, walking over to his side, "what's troubling you?" He didn't turn at first, but after a moment he spoke, his voice low and measured. "The truth we uncovered, Watson. It has repercussions. You've seen the aftermath of our work, but I have a feeling we've not seen the last of it." I frowned, crossing my arms. "You're saying there's more to this than we realized?" Holmes gave a faint nod, his fingers tapping the side of the window frame, as though drawing some invisible connection between the fragments of his thoughts. The Custodians are gone for now, but the influence they wielded, it's not so easily erased. It's an idea, Watson. An idea that has spread too far to be contained. I could sense the depth of his concerns, even if I did not fully grasp the intricacies of his reasoning. Holmes was rarely wrong in his assessments, but this particular case, this distortion of time, memory, and reality seemed to gnaw at him in a way I hadn't seen before. "We've exposed the mirror," I said, trying to follow his thoughts. "We've undone their work. What more could there be?" Holmes turned to face me, his expression grave. "It's not about the mirror anymore, Watson. It's about what's left behind. There are people, factions, who still seek to manipulate history. The truth may have been restored, but there are those who believe that they can control it, shape it, just as Wetherby did." I felt a shiver run down my spine. The notion that others, perhaps more secretive and even more dangerous, might have learned from Wetherby's mistakes, that they might be planning their own rise to power, was unsettling. "Do you think they're already watching us?" I asked. Holmes paused, his eyes narrowing as if he were considering something from far beyond the walls of our flat. "We are not the only ones with an interest in this, Watson. We've simply uncovered one part of the puzzle. There are others who understand the power of memory, of truth, and the lengths they are willing to go to in order to control it." His words hung heavily in the air, and I couldn't help but feel the growing weight of the unknown. What had we set in motion by exposing the Custodians? Was our work truly done, or had we inadvertently opened a door that could never be closed? That evening, after Holmes had retired to his usual place by the fireplace, a knock at the door interrupted the quiet. A brief moment of surprise passed between us, for neither of us was expecting visitors. Holmes's keen eyes flicked toward me, a silent acknowledgement that something was amiss. When I opened the door, a man stood before me, his face familiar but obscured by the shadows. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat, and his eyes were hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat. His posture was stiff, calculated, as though he knew exactly what he was doing and exactly what he wanted from us. "Mr. Watson," the man said, his voice smooth but cold, "I'm here on behalf of those who remain." The words struck me like a blow to the chest, and before I could ask him what he meant, he stepped inside, pushing past me into the room. Holmes's sharp gaze followed him immediately, his hand hovering near the mantelpiece, as if ready to react at any moment. The man removed his hat, revealing an intense gaze that seemed to pierce straight through us. He wasn't just anyone. He was a representative of something far darker, far more dangerous than we had yet encountered. "I believe we have much to discuss," the man continued, his eyes locking onto Holmes. "You've meddled with forces that you cannot possibly understand, and now you will see the consequences of your actions." Holmes stood, his posture straight, eyes sharp. "I'm listening," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Explain yourself." The man smiled, though there was little warmth in it. "You've removed one thread, Mr. Holmes, but threads are woven together. There are others, many others, who believe in the Custodians' cause, and they will not let you walk away so easily." Holmes' lips pressed into a thin line. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing, Mr. Holmes, nothing but your acknowledgement. Acknowledge that the truth is far more complicated than you believe, and that the work you've done has only scratched the surface." The man turned, heading for the door as smoothly as he had entered. "Be prepared. This isn't over. Not by a long shot." As the door clicked shut behind him, the weight of his words settled heavily between Holmes and me. The man's presence had been unsettling, and I could feel the tension in the room mounting. Holmes sat back down by the fireplace, his mind already working through the layers of this new threat. "The Custodians were only one faction, Watson," he murmured, "and their cause is far from finished. Others, more secretive, more elusive, are waiting for their turn. I stared into the fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows on the walls. The mystery had deepened, and it seemed that our work was far from over. As Holmes quietly adjusted his papers, his mind already spinning with new strategies and possibilities, I knew that we had only just begun to understand the full scope of the world we had stumbled into. The Custodians were a memory now, but their legacy and the forces that had been set into motion would continue to haunt us. Chapter 16. The days that followed were quiet, but they felt different somehow. London, ever the living city, had resumed its usual rhythm, but beneath the surface there was a new undercurrent, an awareness that something had shifted. We had stopped Wetherby. We had shattered the mirror that had manipulated reality itself. But in doing so, we had opened a door to a truth far more complicated than either of us had anticipated. Holmes and I spent the following weeks trying to make sense of what had occurred. The man who had visited us, the shadowy figure who had warned us that our work was not done, lingered in our minds like a spectre. Holmes was as driven as ever, piecing together the fragments of the conspiracy that had once been the Custodians. But despite our best efforts, it became clear that the true extent of their influence was far beyond what we had imagined. I sat across from Holmes one evening, watching as he scribbled furiously in his notebook. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, and the weight of our last encounter still hung in the air. "Holmes," I began, breaking the silence, "do you ever wonder if we've done enough? If we've truly stopped whatever it was that Wetherby was trying to accomplish?" Holmes looked up from his notes, his eyes sharp as ever. "We did what we had to, Watson. We stopped the Custodians, but that doesn't mean the world will stop changing. The truth is rarely straightforward, and sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones left unsaid, the ones we can't yet understand." I nodded slowly, unsure of how to answer. The weight of everything we had uncovered pressed on my chest. We have faced a conspiracy that had the power to alter the very nature of history itself. But now, as we moved beyond that confrontation, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were merely waiting for the next revelation, the next twist in a story that had no clear ending. "Do you think the world is ready for the truth, Holmes?" I asked quietly. He stood, walking toward the window as if considering the question for the first time. The city below seemed unaware of the forces that had once threatened to unravel it, oblivious to the secret histories hidden beneath its streets. "No, Watson," he said softly, almost to himself. "The world is never truly ready for the truth, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have to be told." I watched him, feeling a strange sense of finality in his words. There was always more to uncover, more mysteries waiting to be solved. But for now, the most important thing was that the truth had been exposed. We have fought for it, and in the end, it was the one thing that could never be erased. As Holmes turned back to face me, I saw that familiar spark in his eyes, the spark that had driven him through countless cases, countless dangers. It was a spark that could never be extinguished, no matter how many shadows tried to surround him. "I suppose, Watson," he said with a hint of a smile, "we have our work cut out for us." And so, with that, the case of the Custodians came to an end. But the world, as always, would continue to turn, and with it the unending pursuit of truth, no matter how elusive, no matter how dangerous, would go on.